Shopping my stash this summer has me digging through my older stuff and feeling really grateful for my craft supplies. But it's also revealing that I often buy not quite the same thing, but similar things. Turns out I have 3 stencils that have my favorite orange peel pattern, and that's where you come in. I need you to watch and tell me whether I really need to keep all 3, and if not, which 1 or 2 of them should go. I'm starting with this 6x9 stencil from scrapbook.com. I like to use the grid under my grip mat to help me center and line up my cardstock so then I can make sure that my pattern is straight. That just makes it easier if I want to use a full panel or even if I want to trim it down later. I've chosen a really pretty color combination today. A couple of yellows from the Spa collection along with Coral Cabana and Party Dress from the Party side. Combining like this is a great way to kind of tone down the vibrancy a bit. I'm putting down 1 color of ink in each of the orange peel circles, allowing them to mix because each circle is actually part of 4 other circles. And the big size of this stencil is really nice because it gives me the ability to make larger panels. Just before I finished this panel, I spritzed some water to further soften the colors and lifted some of the ink with a microfiber towel. So this is pretty. Lots of white space to keep an airy feel. And you can use that white space to customize your pattern. I decided to stamp some dots into the little centers. At first I thought I would try to combine colors on the stamp, but honestly it was just too much work to try and get a smooth blend, so I used a single color for each one. I found that the whipped honey on its own was too light, so I skipped that and I put sauna down in the diagonals, and then I alternated the coral and the party dress in the remaining places. You could use a little flower stamp instead, you could use small letters to create a message, or you could put the dots in the flower centers rather than in the circle centers to get different looks. I spritzed the whole panel with water, again to get that almost aged look, and I'm really happy with this. I'm so happy with these colors. I'm going to focus on the backgrounds now and finish the cards at the end, because I did something special for all of them. Here's another look you can get with that same stencil. I put down a layer of the whipped honey ink all over my panel, and then I went back in with the sauna just in a number of places, kind of focusing on the centers of the 4-petal flowers in the pattern. Remember, this pattern is made up of circles and flowers, depending on how you look at it. And this monochrome panel is pretty on its own. But then I shifted the stencil so that the circles are now overlaying the flowers, and then I did the similar thing. I went over the whole thing with the party dress using a really light hand, before adding in a few darker spots with the Coral Cabana. This layered look shows so many combinations of these 4 colors, and it has a really nice grid-like pattern. Stencil number 2 is Geo Circles from Simon Hurley. Layer 1 is a smaller scale of the same orange peel pattern, and I did the same thing as my very first panel. I tried to get all the whipped honey circles I wanted down first, because once the stencil is loaded with all that darker ink, I don't want to be needing to come back in and maybe contaminating my blending brush. People often ask me how many blending brushes I have, and I do have a lot, but I'm really okay with using one brush for more than one color when the colors are darker. I have one brush for Rouge and Rockin' Red. I have one brush for Party Dress and Be Mine. I don't really mind if those colors aren't absolutely pure because they give a similar enough effect. But I find with the lighter colors, I really do want to keep those brushes to one color so that I do get the pure color. So here's another pretty panel with that pretty mix of colors. And this time, instead of stamping in the centers, layer 2 of this stencil set fills in the centers with that pointy diamond shape. And I'm filling them in randomly again. I guess overall I'm going for a mix, but on the pinker side of the mix. I'm happy to have the yellow and the oranges that result from the mixing, but I definitely want these cards to read pink, so I did more of the pinks than the yellows. We know what the outline or layer 1 pattern looks like on its own, but what about layer 2 on its own? This one has all the pointy diamonds and should leave us a white orange peel pattern. Same process as before, filling in each area and not worrying too much that my brush is going beyond one diamond. That's how I'm getting the pretty blends. But if you wanted to, you could be very precise and get one color in each hole. I would probably cut a mask from acetate to help keep the color in each little diamond. And here's another pretty pattern. And again, a fun one to customize. I got out a smaller dot stamp and I started at the top thinking I would stamp in every little white space. But then I thought maybe just a few random dots here and there in my 4 colors would add kind of an unexpected feature to the pattern. And it wasn't at all that I was getting lazy about all that stamping. Stencil number 3 is from Studio Light. It's a 6x9 layered stencil, but it has both layers on the same stencil. See what I mean? You put your inks through the first layer. This time I did the whipped honey through all of it, and then I added some sauna through a few of the circle patterns. We've seen this one before. What we haven't seen is this second layer, which is a different pattern than Simon's second layer. This one doesn't fill in the centers of the circles, it adds more petals. I went over the whole thing with a light hand of party dress, and then I came back with the coral cabana. Oh my goodness, isn't that pretty? Now to finish all of these cards, I wanted kind of a base color, but not black. This kind of boho feel got me thinking a denim blue would look pretty. So I mixed some stone blue and some slate gray inks to create a custom color that was closer to what I was looking for. This is one of my favorite qualities of translucent dye inks. They lie on top of each other and create new colors. Here's my dried panel along with a panel of Cove Blue ink, which would have been a good choice too, just not exactly what I wanted. Now here's all the cards I made. The first one with the scrapbook stencil and stamped dots, I added a gray panel behind it that I had embossed with the Spellbinders Circle Illusion 3D embossing folder, which has that same orange peel pattern. I added a gray heart behind my die-cut Concord and 9th sentiment. The embossed pattern isn't quite the same size as the stenciled pattern, so I couldn't emboss the stenciled panel, but it is a nice tie-in in the background, I think. Card 2 is where I shifted the scrapbook stencil. I cut out a circle from the center and I popped it up with a gray frame. My gray thanks sentiment didn't stand out enough from the busy background, so I added a white strip that I had embossed with the Origami Folds embossing folder. That isn't quite orange peel, but it's pretty close. Next is the fully filled in Simon Hurley stencil. I cut this one in as big a circle as I could, and I added a thick, chunky waffle flower thank you. Number 4 is the second layer panel with the random dots. I added a smaller gray circle with a white circle that was embossed with the Circle Illusion folder. But this time I flipped it over so that the orange peel pattern is debossed, and there's more flat space for my waffle flower die cut thank you to stick to. Ah, the pretty flowers! This stencil creates a pattern that's about 4 inches wide, so you can't cover a full card with it. I trimmed it so that it goes top to bottom for a slightly different look, and I added a white strip debossed with the Dotty Circles 3D embossing folder from Altenew. And I added a mixed sentiment, the happies from LDRS Creative and the birthdays from scrapbook.com. Now after trimming down all those stencil panels to make my square cards, I had lots of little pattern strips left, as well as some of the gray scraps. So I glued them all down and I got 2 more cards out of my leftovers. I finished them both the same way with the chunky hello from Waffle Flower. And I just want to quickly go back to that last stencil from Studio Light. When I finished the flower petal panel, I had a brainstorm. Well, 2 actually. First, you can use the stencil on a half sheet of cardstock and do 2 card fronts at once. And second, if you use reds on the orange peel and then greens on the extra petals, you're going to get a pretty poinsettia pattern. I used a big sheet of acetate to mask off the extra petals side of the stencil, while I went in with 2 shades of red on the orange peel side. This was too big for my turntable, so I'm working on my big waffle flower grip mat here. I moved the mask and then I put down 2 greens through the extra petal side. And then I turned the stencil so that each side was on the opposite side. I spent some time lining it up, trying to make sure I had it exactly right. Next time I'll test it with something with a corner to see if that helps, but sometimes with these patterns you have to shift them to make them work, and the corner doesn't really make it any better. For this one I trimmed it down and I used a Copic marker to add a dark yellow center to each poinsettia. I finished it with a red mat along with a die cut Merry Christmas from scrapbook.com. And speaking of poinsettias, that's another area where I may just have I have lots but not quite the same problem. Maybe I'll come back for your opinion on that later this year. But today, let me know what you think I should do with these 3. I'll be honest, after this session, I think there's good reasons to keep all 3 of them. And with stencils, it's not like they take up much space, right? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.